They say we are the first, the only chapter in the story of intelligence on this planet. But the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and our species, barely 300,000. Between those two numbers lies an ocean of forgotten time, an era no book remembers, an age that left no monuments, or perhaps left them buried under miles of stone, ocean, and denial. What if civilization didn't begin with us, but restarted through us? What if before pyramids, before writing, before even myth, another humanity rose and fell, so completely that only the bones of continents remember? Every mountain, every seabed, every fossilized layer of dust might hold echoes of a world erased. The questions left behind are older than religion, deeper than history, and colder than time itself. Who were they? What destroyed them? And what if their fingerprints are still pulsing beneath our feet, hidden in the chemistry of the earth? Tonight, we search for what came before recorded history, across floods, ruins, and impossible memories buried in stone. Welcome to Deformed History. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. Picture this: the Earth spinning in the dark of space, old as dust, older than memory, oceans breathing, continents drifting, ice and fire sculpting the surface like hands carving a face. We walk upon it now as if it has always belonged to us. But what if the truth is that we are not the first to call it home? What if the ground beneath our cities remembers older footsteps, those of another intelligence that came and vanished long before our recorded dawn? In 2018, two scientists dared to ask that forbidden question. Their names were Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt, an astrophysicist and a climate researcher, men of data and math, not myth. Yet what they proposed shook the foundations of both science and imagination. They called it the Silurian Hypothesis, after a British sci-fi story about reptilian beings who ruled the world before humans. But this was no fiction. It was an experiment in thought, an invitation to consider a possibility we rarely entertain, that Earth may have hosted an advanced civilization millions of years before us, one erased so completely by time that only chemistry could whisper its name. Their question was simple, yet staggering. Would it be possible to detect an industrial civilization in the geological record? Imagine digging through layers of rock and finding not bones or tools, but patterns, chemical scars, marking where machines once breathed, where factories once burned. If we were to vanish tomorrow, how long before the planet erased us too? A few thousand years, they said. Skyscrapers would collapse into dust, plastics would dissolve, even radiation from our nuclear reactors would fade into background hum. The Earth would heal, absorb, forget. Within 10 million years, it would be as if we never existed. So, what about those who may have come before? What if they too vanished, leaving only faint traces buried in the deep crust? Traces that we now mistake for natural anomalies. It sounds far-fetched until you consider how ruthless the planet can be with memory. The Earth renews itself. Plate tectonics swallows continents. Erosion grinds mountains into powder. Sediment buries the ruins of ages beneath newer worlds. The oldest ocean floor on the planet is barely 200 million years old. Everything before that has been recycled. The slate has been wiped clean again and again. Frank and Schmidt realized that if such an ancient civilization had ever existed, its ruins would not survive the fire and crush of time. But perhaps its fingerprints would. Chemical signatures that defy natural patterns, anomalies in carbon isotopes, irregular concentrations of nitrogen or heavy metals. These would remain trapped in the stone, like whispers of a vanished industry. If an ancient people once burned fuel, mined metals, or altered the air, the echo would still be there, faint but measurable. They began with carbon. In the modern world, our burning of fossil fuels leaves a distinct fingerprint, an imbalance between carbon-12 and carbon-13, a subtle shift in the ratio that future geologists could detect millions of years from now. It would look like a sudden bloom of organic carbon, as though life itself had gone wild for a geological instant. Could something similar have happened before us? There are indeed periods in Earth's deep history when the same imbalance appears. Spikes of carbon and oxygen change without clear natural cause. The most dramatic of these occurred 56 million years ago, an episode called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, when global temperatures soared and the poles turned tropical. Scientists blame volcanic eruptions or methane release from the sea floor. But Frank and Schmidt asked, what if that warming was man-made, only by someone else's man? Then there is the question of nitrogen. The widespread use of fertilizers today alters the natural balance of nitrogen isotopes in soil and sediment. Could a similar anomaly exist deep in time? If so, it could hint at ancient agriculture or something like it. These traces would not be monuments of stone, but microscopic graffiti, written in atoms, not words. Skeptics laugh, of course. They say nature itself can mimic these signs. Volcanoes spew carbon. Asteroids trigger chemical chaos. Bacteria shift isotopes in unpredictable ways. But the hypothesis was never meant as proof. Only a mirror. A way of seeing our own fragility against the scale of time. If we could disappear so completely that another species 10 million years from now would doubt we ever existed, then why should we be so certain we are the first? Think of the ocean floor. Dark, vast, restless. There, hydrothermal vents breathe chemical storms that could erase any ruin in days. Think of mountains rising and crumbling, deserts swallowing whole cities. Even in our short span, we've seen how floods, earthquakes, and eruptions erase lifetimes of history. Pompeii vanished in a night. An entire civilization could vanish in an age, leaving not one recognizable stone behind. But let's imagine, for a moment, that they were here. Not the lizard men of science fiction, but an intelligent species evolved from some forgotten branch of life. Perhaps amphibian thinkers from the Silurian seas, building tools of coral and alloy before land creatures ever walked upright. Perhaps beings who lived through epochs when continents were still joined, when the air was thicker, the seas warmer, and the stars in a different pattern. Maybe they learned too much, too fast, burned through their world as we burn through ours, and the planet, ever merciful and merciless, buried them beneath her healing skin. If they lived, their ruins are now molecules, their libraries, dust, their monuments, magma. And yet part of their story may still circulate in our myths, in the recurring memories of floods, of fallen ages, of gods who came before. Every culture tells a version of that same story, of a world that was and then was lost. Maybe the myth of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of Mu, are not inventions at all, but distorted recollections passed down from the survivors of a civilization erased by time itself. Science shrugs at that idea, but imagination does not. The Earth has been many worlds. It wore jungles where Antarctica now sleeps under ice. It buried forests beneath deserts and raised coral reefs into mountains. Beneath every step we take lies the shadow of another era, another rhythm of life. Our fossils will one day join them, pressed between layers of shale and sand like a heartbeat frozen mid-pulse. The Silurian Hypothesis does not ask us to believe, it asks us to wonder. To look at our civilization not as a climax, but as a recurring note in a song the Earth has sung for billions of years. Civilizations may be rare, but time is infinite, and memory is short. Somewhere in those endless strata may lie the signature of minds that dreamed before us, erased but not forgotten. The question is not whether they existed, but whether we will leave behind any trace more enduring than theirs. So we begin here, at the edge of deep time, where the known dissolves into the possible. We will walk backward through the fossil record, through myths, and through ruins, to ask not just who came before, but why they vanished. The Earth remembers, even when we do not. Imagine standing on a cliff that overlooks the entire timeline of Earth, layers upon layers of compressed memory, each stratum whispering the name of something that once was. The deeper you go, the stranger those whispers become. Fossils give way to minerals, patterns, and finally silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder whether something intelligent once spoke here and was erased. That question leads us to the next shadow in this long descent. The theory of the lost mother continent, a place some called Mu. The story begins not in a laboratory, but in the imagination of the 19th century, an era when archaeology was more dream than discipline, when explorers and mystics searched for the roots of civilization in sands, jungles, and myth. Among them was Augustus Le Plongeon, a linguist and amateur archaeologist who spent years wandering through the ruins of the Yucatan Peninsula. The world knew him as eccentric, but he was convinced he had found something greater than temples and stones. In the strange symbols of Mayan tablets, he claimed to see messages written by survivors of a lost world, a great Pacific continent that perished long before Egypt, Babylon, or Sumeria were born. He called it Mu. Le Plongeon said the Mayans were not the first, but the heirs of an older race, refugees from a land that had vanished beneath the ocean. He believed the cataclysm that sank Mu also birthed the myths of Atlantis and the Great Flood. His theory might have faded into the dust of forgotten speculation, but decades later, another man picked it up and gave it new life, James Churchward, a British writer and retired soldier who had served in colonial India. Churchward's version was not just a theory, it was a revelation. He claimed that during his service, he befriended a high-ranking Hindu priest who guarded sacred stone tablets written in a language older than Sanskrit, the Nakal tablets. These tablets, he said, told the story of humanity's true origin, a story that began on the lost continent of Mu, the motherland of mankind. The priest, intrigued by Churchward's passion, taught him to read the dead language, and what he translated would shake the comfortable foundation of modern history. According to Churchward, Mu was not a myth, but a continent larger than South America, stretching across the Pacific from Hawaii to Easter Island and south towards New Zealand. 50 million people, divided into 10 tribes, lived under one government, guided by a priestly order that ruled not by war, but by wisdom. They mastered sciences that humanity would not rediscover for tens of thousands of years. Energy drawn from the earth itself, buildings that defied decay, flight powered by magnetic resonance. He described shining cities connected by stone highways and temples that harnessed sunlight as power. And then, in a single night, it was gone. Churchward wrote that the continent was destroyed 12,000 years ago in a series of cataclysmic earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The land split apart and fell into the ocean, leaving only scattered islands and legends to mark where the first great civilization once stood. In one night of fire, he said, the land of Mu sank, and with it, 64 million souls were lost. Skeptics called it fantasy. Historians dismissed him as delusional, but the story refused to die. Something about the name Mu echoed through the imagination of the early 20th century, just as Atlantis had centuries before. For some, it was another allegory of hubris and fall. For others, it was a breadcrumb leading back to a truth buried too deep for science to acknowledge. Churchward pointed to Easter Island as his proof, a remote volcanic dot in the Pacific Ocean where colossal stone figures called moai stood watch over the sea. Who carved them, and how? He claimed these statues were the work of Mu's descendants, survivors who carried fragments of their motherland's wisdom to the islands that remained above water. Even today, archaeologists debate how the Rapa Nui people moved these enormous stones, some weighing 80 tons. The islanders themselves once said the statues walked into place, an answer that might sound like a joke, until you realize how ancient cultures used myth as camouflage for lost technologies. But the more you study the geography of the Pacific, the stranger it becomes. Beneath the waves lie ridges, plateaus, and submerged mountain chains, ghostly outlines of what could once have been dry land. The Tuamotu Plateau, the Marshall Islands, the Mariana Basin, all sit along what Churchward identified as the sunken spine of Mu. Geologists argue these are volcanic formations, but to those who believe, they are the bones of a drowned world. What made this idea so magnetic was not just the mystery of disappearance, but its echo in other myths around the world. The Polynesians tell of Hiva, the homeland that sank beneath the sea. The Japanese speak of Lemuria. The Hindus remember Kumarikandam, the lost cradle of Tamil civilization. The Greeks speak of Atlantis. Different names, different seas, same story. A golden land destroyed by water, its knowledge scattered among survivors. Could all these legends be describing the same event from different shores? Churchward insisted yes. He believed the survivors of Mu became the builders of Egypt, India, and the Americas, that the same root language, symbols, and sacred geometry appear across all early civilizations because they share a single ancestral source. He saw the spiral motifs and Mayan carvings mirrored in Hindu temples, the solar discs of Egypt reflected in Andean art, the same mathematics hidden in pyramids across continents. Humanity, he wrote, is the child of Mu. For decades, scientists dismissed these claims as pseudoscience, but the persistence of the pattern gnaws at the imagination. Why do ancient cultures separated by oceans share the same architectural precision, the same myth of a flood, the same reverence for the sun? Coincidence, perhaps, or maybe collective memory, the kind that survives not in bones or tools, but in stories. Let's suppose, for a moment, that Churchward wasn't entirely wrong. If a continent had existed in the Pacific and later vanished, what would it leave behind? no monuments. The ocean floor renews itself every few 100 million years, subducting old crust beneath new. But chemical traces, shards of isotopes, magnetic scars, could linger. Scientists have, in fact, found patches of crust near the Micronesian region that are older than the Pacific seafloor around them, remnants of an earlier geological formation. Could these be the geological ghosts of Mu? And what if the cataclysm that destroyed it wasn't natural? Could an ancient civilization have triggered its own extinction? By war? By energy gone wrong? By tampering with the forces of the planet? Churchward's writings hint at something beyond earthquakes. "The fires came from beneath," he wrote, "and the heavens rained fire in return." To modern ears, it sounds like poetry, or maybe a memory of technological disaster, something like nuclear fire recorded in myth. The human mind recoils at such ideas, yet history is full of truths once dismissed as fantasy. Troy was a myth until Heinrich Schliemann dug it out of the ground. The city of Dwarka was legend until divers found its ruins beneath the Arabian Sea. Who decides where legend ends and possibility begins? Perhaps the story of Mu survives not because it is true, but because something in us remembers the pattern of loss. The sea keeps secrets better than any library. The pressure, the darkness, the weight of time, all conspire to erase what once was. But sometimes, the ocean gives back its dead. Coral-covered walls, submerged temples, inexplicable geometry that does not belong to nature. Somewhere under the Pacific, the floor still trembles with the echoes of that myth. Whether it was called Mu, Lemuria, or something else entirely, the idea of a vanished motherland keeps resurfacing because it feels like a missing chapter in our own story. The part we sense but cannot recall. And maybe that's the point. The myth endures because memory itself endures, buried not in stone but in consciousness, passed down in lullabies, creation stories, and floods. As we follow that memory through history's undercurrents, we are not chasing fantasy. We are listening for a pulse, the heartbeat of something ancient, intelligent, and gone. The ocean is not empty. It is full of echoes, and some of them, if we listen closely enough, might still be speaking. There's a strange kind of comfort in believing that Mu was only a myth, that its cities never gleamed beneath the Pacific sun, that no voice of a forgotten people was ever drowned in fire and salt. But the problem with myths is that they multiply when ignored. One leads to another, and soon you realize the entire world hums with the same refrain, the memory of a lost civilization swallowed by the sea. When the tale of Mu drifted westward, it found its reflection in another legend, one far older, far more seductive: Atlantis. Atlantis did not begin as fantasy. It began with Plato, the philosopher who turned questions into mirrors. Around 360 BCE, he wrote two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, in which he described a mighty island civilization that existed 9,000 years before Solon, the Athenian statesman. In those dialogues, Plato spoke not like a dreamer, but like a historian. He named locations, distances, rulers, and even the lineages of kings. Atlantis, he said, lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, in an ocean larger than the Mediterranean itself. It was an empire of great wealth and greater pride, ruled by the sons of Poseidon, god of the sea. And then, in one terrible night and day, Atlantis sank beneath the waves. For millennia, philosophers debated whether Plato had invented the story as an allegory, a cautionary tale about greed and moral decay, or whether he had inherited a memory from an older, forgotten source. Plato claimed that the story came from Egyptian priests who told it to Solon, who then passed it to his family until it reached Plato's pen. To the Egyptians, it was history. To the Greeks, it became a myth. To us, it is a question that refuses to die. Plato's account is astonishingly detailed. He described concentric rings of land and sea surrounding the capital, canals radiating outward like spokes, bridges lined with towers, and temples plated in precious metals. The greatest of these was the Temple of Poseidon, whose roof shone like fire and whose walls glowed with orichalcum, a mysterious alloy said to shine like copper, but more brilliant than gold. The Atlanteans possessed ships that crossed oceans, chariots that flew, and knowledge that touched the stars. They lived in harmony with their world until, as Plato wrote, their portion of the divine faded. When arrogance replaced balance, their civilization collapsed, destroyed by earthquakes, floods, and the fury of the gods. But what if the story was not allegory, not moral instruction, but record? If you strip away the mythic flourishes, Plato's Atlantis reads like the obituary of a civilization that once existed and perished in a cataclysm that reshaped the world. The timing, roughly 12,000 years before his own era, coincides eerily with the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose more than 300 feet and entire coastlines vanished. What if Atlantis was simply one of the many coastal cultures erased when the ice melted and the ocean swallowed the lowlands? In recent decades, geologists and archaeologists have uncovered ruins and anomalies that seem to whisper Atlantis's name. Off the coast of India, the sunken city of Dwarka lies beneath the waves, its walls arranged with geometric precision. In the Caribbean, sonar scans have revealed symmetrical structures beneath the silt, like streets buried under centuries of coral. Near the Azores, divers have found stone formations resembling stepped pyramids, eerily similar to those of Mesoamerica. None of these prove Atlantis, but together they raise a question Plato himself would have loved. What if truth and myth are not opposites, but reflections of the same lost event? Atlantis may not have been one city, but a civilization, a network of maritime cultures sharing a single spiritual and scientific lineage. Across Egypt, South America, Mesopotamia, and the Pacific, you find the same obsessions: sacred geometry, star alignment, the worship of water, and the myth of the flood. It's as if fragments of a shattered memory drifted across the world's oceans and seeded every culture with the same dream of a golden age that fell into ruin. Now, imagine Atlantis not as marble domes and glowing towers, but as an advanced culture of the late Pleistocene, built along coastlines that no longer exist. When the ice sheets melted, their cities drowned, their histories turned to sediment, and survivors scattered to high ground, carrying fragments of knowledge, astronomy, architecture, agriculture. These became the seeds of the first known civilizations. The Egyptians called their teacher Thoth. The Mesoamericans called him Quetzalcoatl. The Sumerians spoke of Enki, the wise one who rose from the water. Different names, same archetype, a luminous stranger from a vanished world who brought the arts of civilization. It is tempting to dismiss this as coincidence, yet the pattern persists. Why do these stories describe their gods not as spirits, but but as beings of flesh and technology. Why do ancient temples, thousands of miles apart, align with the same stars? Why does the Great Pyramid of Giza share mathematical ratios with the Mayan Temple of Kukulkan? Across the globe, sacred architecture appears to remember something that history forgot: a language of measurement, vibration, and resonance. Let's walk through Plato's Atlantis again, this time as archaeologists of imagination. Picture a city built on the principles of energy and geometry, where sound and magnetism shape architecture, where buildings hum at frequencies that heal and sustain life. Picture transportation that glides rather than grinds, vessels propelled by anti-gravitational resonance, crafts that move not through combustion, but through harmony with the Earth's magnetic field. Picture power drawn not from fire, but from the crystalline structure of minerals beneath the ground, a technology that uses the planet itself as a conductor. To us, this sounds like science fiction. To them, perhaps, it was science. When ancient myths speak of crystals that store light, could they be crude recollections of piezoelectric materials, quartz amplifiers used at energy systems we no longer understand? The Atlanteans were said to heal through sound and color, to study the stars not for navigation but for communion. They believed that everything vibrated: matter, thought, even morality. When vibration fell out of harmony, sickness arose, not just in bodies, but in societies. Balance was the highest law. The fall of Atlantis, then, was not merely geological, but spiritual, a civilization that lost resonance with its own purpose. Plato's version ends with destruction, but fragments of other sources suggest survival. Egyptian records speak of those who came from the west after the waters rose. The Maya tell of teachers from a drowned land who rebuilt their calendar and their temples. Even the Dogon people of Mali, isolated in West Africa, speak of visitors from a sunken island beyond the horizon. Could the survivors of Atlantis have seeded the next wave of human culture? The idea isn't as absurd as it sounds. Genetic studies show sudden bursts of agricultural and architectural innovation appearing simultaneously across the globe around 10,000 BCE in Turkey, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and Mesoamerica, with no clear explanation. Civilizations that had no contact with one another somehow discovered the same astronomical principles, the same sacred measurements, the same obsession with the heavens. If knowledge is a river, then its source lies upstream, somewhere in the floodwaters of prehistory. And yet, every age of brilliance seems to end the same way: in fire, in flood, in silence. The Silurian Hypothesis warned us that geology erases. The legend of Mu warned us that arrogance destroys. The myth of Atlantis reminds us that perfection decays. Whether or not these civilizations were real, they mirror our own trajectory too well to ignore. We too have drawn power from the earth, bent nature to our will, forgotten the cost of imbalance. Perhaps that's why these stories persist. They are not only about the past, but about the cycle that binds all civilizations: birth, mastery, pride, collapse. Atlantis may be gone, but its reflection glitters in our cities, in our towers of glass and steel, in our endless hunger for control. And maybe one day, when our monuments have turned to dust and our oceans have risen again, another species will dig through the layers and find strange chemical fingerprints, and wonder, as we do now, if someone before them once conquered the world and then lost it. The mystery of Atlantis isn't only geological or historical, It's psychological. It is the human need to remember something we cannot prove, to feel that we are echoes of an older greatness. Every myth of a lost civilization is a confession that we sense the fragility of our own. So when we stare at the ocean and imagine cities glowing beneath it, we're not just mourning the past, we're glimpsing the future. Because if the cycle holds, one day we too will be someone else's legend, their ancient world, their Atlantis. The story of Atlantis ends where it began, in silence beneath the waves. But if you listen closely enough, through the static of centuries, you might still hear the low vibration of a memory refusing to die. Perhaps that sound is not only a reminder of what once was, but a warning of what may come. Because history, when drowned, always finds a way to resurface. When the ocean swallowed Atlantis, the story of the flood was born. Every ancient culture has carried a version of that memory, reshaped by language and belief, yet all pointing toward the same apocalyptic event, a world drowned to cleanse, to punish, or to begin again. The Great Flood is not only a religious myth, it is a geological wound. It has left its fingerprints in silt and ice, in marine fossils found on mountaintops, in layers of sediment that tell of sudden, catastrophic change. And behind the poetry of divine wrath or cosmic cleansing, there might have been something far more real, a flood that ended one world and gave birth to another. In the book of Genesis, the flood came as judgment. The earth was corrupt, the people violent, and only one man found favor in the eyes of God, Noah. He built an ark, gathered the living, and waited as the skies opened. For 40 days and nights, water erased civilization. When the ark settled on dry ground, humanity began anew. But this is not a story unique to the Bible. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written thousands of years earlier in Sumer, tells of Utnapishtim, a man chosen by the gods to survive an almost identical deluge. In Hindu myth, Manu was warned by a divine fish of an approaching flood and saved all living beings in a great ship. The Greeks had Deucalion and Pyrrha. The Maya had Hunahpu and Xbalanque. Even the ancient Chinese, Norse, and Australian Aboriginal traditions recall a flood that covered the world. 200 cultures across every inhabited continent share this same memory. Coincidence seems too small a word. What if these stories are not fiction, but recollections of an event so vast it seared itself into the collective memory of humanity? Let's trace the flood backward through time. Around 12,000 years ago, the planet was emerging from the last ice age. Vast glaciers covered North America and Eurasia. Then something changed. Temperatures rose abruptly, sea levels surged, and entire coastlines vanished. Geologists call this period the Younger Dryas boundary, a time when the Earth's climate shifted violently in a geological blink. Some scientists believe the cause was a comet or asteroid striking the polar ice sheets, unleashing torrents of meltwater that flooded continents and sent shockwaves through the global ecosystem. Others suggest internal cycles of the planet, volcanism, magnetic shifts, or the delicate balance of ocean currents spiraled out of control. Whatever the cause, the evidence is undeniable. Rivers carved new paths overnight, forests drowned, and species vanished. In the American Northwest, there are scars that still remember it, the channeled scablands of Washington State. Imagine valleys carved not by slow rivers, but by an ocean in motion. Thousands of square miles of basalt ripped apart in days, Rocks the size of houses hurled like pebbles, entire landscapes erased. For decades, geologists refused to believe it. Floods of that scale were impossible, they said, until satellite images and erosion patterns proved otherwise. A lake larger than modern-day California, called Glacial Lake Missoula, had burst through its icy dam, sending walls of water hundreds of feet high rushing across the continent. That single flood reshaped the land. But what if it was only a fragment of something global? In the Black Sea region, marine archaeologists discovered ancient shorelines far below the surface, evidence that a freshwater lake had once been flooded by salt water from the Mediterranean, when Ice Age meltwater raised global sea levels. Villages and farmlands would have been swallowed overnight. Around the world, similar signatures exist. In the Persian Gulf, now submerged. In the Sunda Shelf of Southeast Asia, where the lost lands of Sundaland once connected Indonesia to the mainland. Even on the continental shelf of Japan, where traces of ancient human activity lie buried beneath the sea. The flood is not metaphor. It is memory encoded in geology. So, what does this mean for the myths? If humanity's earliest stories emerged in the shadow of real cataclysm, then the flood was not divine punishment, it was survival instinct. Those who lived through it would have seen the end of the world. And when they told their children what happened, they spoke in symbols. Gods weeping from the sky, mountains vanishing beneath the waves, a few souls saved by providence or foresight. In time, memory became myth, and myth became scripture. But what if the flood did more than erase? What if it reset? Each of the lost civilizations we've spoken of, Mu, Atlantis, Lemuria, supposedly vanished in a deluge. What if they were victims not of divine wrath, but of the same planetary upheaval that carved the Scablins and drowned Sundaland? Their technology, their art, their stories would have gone under with them. When survivors re-emerged, scattered on higher ground, they would have carried fragments of knowledge, astronomy, agriculture, architecture, and used them to rebuild. The birth of recorded history might have been the aftershock of the world that came before. Even mainstream archaeology hints at this possibility. The rise of the first known civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, Harappa, the Andes, occurred shortly after the global floods receded, as if humanity had awakened from a long sleep with memories it could not explain. How did they suddenly know how to measure the stars, align temples with solstices, or quarry stones weighing hundreds of tons with uncanny precision? Either these were miracles of parallel evolution, or they were echoes of something older, remnants of knowledge that survived the flood. In Turkey's Anatolian plains lies Göbekli Tepe, a site that rewrote everything we thought we knew about civilization. Discovered in the 1990s, it predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years, and the pyramids by 7. Massive pillars carved with lions, vultures, and serpents stand in circular temples built by people who, according to our textbooks, were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. No one knows who built it or why they buried it. But radiocarbon dating places its construction right after the Younger Dryas, the same period as the Great Floods. Could Göbekli Tepe be the work of survivors rebuilding the memory of an older world? When you walk among those stones, you feel it, the precision, the pattern, the quiet knowledge that this was not a beginning, but a return. The carvings seem to speak in code, constellations, animals, celestial alignments. Some researchers, like Graham Hancock, suggest they represent a sky map of a vanished epoch, a star chart remembering the time before the flood. Whether or not that's true, the site feels like a memorial, a shrine to something lost, buried twice, once by water and again by the hands of its builders, as if to protect it from time. The flood, then, was not just destruction. It was transformation. It washed away the arrogance of the old world and gave birth to myth, to religion, to memory. The survivors became prophets. The ruins became sacred, and the earth began again. But beneath that poetic rebirth lingers a darker thought. What if the flood wasn't entirely natural? What if the same force that destroyed the earlier world was triggered, intentionally or not, by those who lived there? Ancient myths speak of wars among the gods, of fire falling from the sky, of weapons that shone brighter than 1,000 suns. To primitive eyes, that would look divine. To ours, it sounds disturbingly familiar. Could a pre-human civilization have reached a level of technology dangerous enough to destroy itself? Across deserts and mountain ranges, archaeologists have found patches of fused glass, known as tektites, that resemble the after-effects of nuclear explosions. In the sands near ancient cities like Mohenjo-Daro, radioactivity levels are anomalously high. Scholars attribute these to meteor impacts or volcanic activity, explanations that fit the comfort of our timeline. But to those who listen for echoes, these are scars of a forgotten catastrophe, perhaps the very one that inspired the story of the flood. Maybe the flood was not water alone. Maybe it was fire and ice, shockwaves that rippled through the planet, resetting the stage for a new humanity. The myths only describe what the survivors could comprehend. To them, the sky opened, the earth broke, and the oceans rose. They did not know they were watching the end of an age. In the end, the flood is not just a story of destruction, but of inheritance. It is the bridge between the lost civilizations and our own, a cosmic divide between memory and history. The waters receded, but the question remains: what came before? And how much of their world still lives in ours, in our myths, our genes, our dreams? The earth keeps secrets better than any god. Beneath the waves, beneath the rock, beneath the silence, it remembers everything. And sometimes, when the tide is low or the wind shifts over ancient valleys, you can almost hear it breathing, a faint murmur of the world before the flood, calling out through time, asking if we are finally ready to listen. When the floodwaters receded and the earth drew its first new breath, what was left behind wasn't silence. It was confusion. The survivors of that deluge must have looked around at a world reborn, yet broken. Mountains where seas once shimmered, deserts where rivers once roared, and the scattered bones of a lost age buried beneath the silt. Imagine standing among them, the air heavy with ash, the stars newly rearranged, the memory of thunder still echoing beneath the skin. Those who lived through it would have felt as though the gods had hit a reset button. But somewhere in the ruins, fragments of knowledge lingered. The flood had erased the cities, not the memory of how to build them. It is within those fragments that the next mystery of human history begins. The rise of impossibly advanced architecture and forgotten technology, structures that seem to belong to a civilization far older than the cultures that inherited them. The story of the lost world doesn't end with Atlantis or Mu. It continues in the stones of places we can still touch, if we know how to look. Let's begin with one of the most enigmatic of them all, Puma Punku in Bolivia. High in the Andes, 13,000 feet above sea level, lies a scattering of stone blocks so precisely cut they fit together like three-dimensional puzzles. Some weigh more than 100 tons. Their angles are laser-sharp, their surfaces smooth as glass, and yet, according to mainstream archaeology, they were carved over 1,500 years ago by a pre-Incan culture without iron tools or the wheel. How? The granite and diorite they shaped are so hard that only modern diamond-tipped drills could reproduce the same precision. And still, every stone locks perfectly with the next, forming joints that have survived earthquakes for millennia. To walk among them is to feel small beside something that defies explanation. Archaeologists say Puma Punku was a temple complex built for gods. The locals once said it was the work of the Viracocha, the bearded creators who came from across the sea to rebuild civilization after the Great Flood. They taught humans agriculture, astronomy, and architecture before vanishing back into the waters. For skeptics, that is just myth. But the stones don't lie. The technique used at Puma Punku, cutting, polishing, and interlocking blocks with microscopic precision, is not found in any known pre-Columbian culture. It appears as if it was inherited, not invented. Travel halfway around the world, and the pattern repeats. In Egypt, the oldest structures, the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, the Osirian, are the most sophisticated. Later dynasties, with better tools and larger populations, built less precisely. The deeper you go in time, the higher the mastery. Archaeologists call it a paradox. Storytellers call it inheritance. What if the ancient Egyptians didn't create civilization from scratch, but rebuilt upon the ruins of an older one? Even their own texts say so. They spoke of the Tepe, the first time, when gods ruled on earth and passed their wisdom to humans before a great catastrophe reshaped the land. The pyramid, then, might not be a beginning, but a memory written in stone. Under the gaze of modern science, those words blur between symbolism and fact. Yet everywhere we look, the evidence of something older lingers. Beneath the sands of Saqqara, beneath the jungles of Guatemala, beneath the waters off Yonaguni, Japan, we find architectural sophistication beyond the capacity of the cultures we've credited with building them. The Yonaguni Monument, for instance, lies 80 feet below the Pacific, its terraces and stairways carved into geometric perfection. Some scientists insist it's a natural formation. Others point to right angles, columns, and patterns too precise to be chance. If it is man-made, it must have been built before sea levels rose 12,000 years ago, which would mean before history began. And that changes everything. Because if humans, or something like us, were shaping stone and building temples before the end of the Ice Age, it means civilization didn't rise suddenly in Mesopotamia around 4000 BCE, but much earlier. It means there was a prehistory we've forgotten, a technological adolescence erased by water and time. Göbekli Tepe, with its carved pillars of lions, scorpions, and vultures, already pushes the dawn of civilization back to 9600 BCE. But what if even Göbekli Tepe was not the first? What if it was built as a monument to an earlier world, a shrine to what the flood destroyed? The more we dig, the more we find traces that shouldn't exist. Massive stone blocks moved without cranes, magnetic alignment to star constellations no longer visible, acoustic properties tuned to amplify sound in ways only modern physics can explain. Were these ancient builders experimenting, or were they remembering? Perhaps they didn't invent their methods. They reawakened them, guided by stories handed down through generations until only the techniques survived, stripped of their origin. And maybe this forgotten science was not technological in the way we understand it. We think of machines, of electricity, of engines. But what if the lost civilizations mastered energy at a subtler level? Sound, vibration, resonance. The stones at Puma Punku, at Giza, at Baalbek in Lebanon all share one thing. They hum. Strike them, and they sing. Some researchers believe the ancients understood the physics of harmonic frequency, how sound waves could lift, shape, or cut stone. It sounds impossible, until you remember that even our modern science has barely scratched the surface of acoustic levitation. There are legends that describe such abilities not as machines, but as rituals. Priests chanting to move mountains, monks aligning their voices to float boulders, sages who could carve rock with words. Myths, yes. But what if those stories are just the cultural memory of a lost form of science, one that bridged the line between physics and spirituality? To them, energy was sacred, not separate. The earth itself was alive, a generator, not a resource. Imagine a civilization that built cities not by conquering nature, but by collaborating with it. Their architecture would resonate with the planet's electromagnetic field, their power drawn from the Earth's vibration rather than fossil fuel. Perhaps that is why their traces are so subtle. Their technology dissolved back into nature when they vanished. No plastic, no metal, no waste, only geometry and stone, the most enduring materials of all. But what happened to them? If they mastered the harmony of the planet, why couldn't they survive its chaos? Maybe the very balance they relied on turned against them. If their technology depended on the stability of the Earth's crust, an abrupt cataclysm, a shifting pole, an asteroid impact, a sudden flood would have shattered their foundation. The energy they drew from the Earth may have imploded, turning creation into destruction. And then came the silence. The survivors, if any, would have fled to higher ground, scattered across continents, carrying fragments of knowledge that would later bloom as isolated miracles. The pyramids, the ziggurats, the stone circles of Britain. The myth of the gods descending from the sky may have been born not from divine imagination, but from the return of human beings who remembered a world the rest had forgotten. Every civilization today is built on ruins, but we rarely ask what lies beneath those ruins. Archaeology digs downward, but rarely long enough to reach the bottom. In the deepest strata of time, history becomes unrecognizable, blending into geology. And perhaps that is exactly where the first humans, or their predecessors, left their mark. Not in written words, but in the architecture of the planet itself. Across continents, the alignment of ancient monuments follows the same celestial logic. The pyramids of Egypt mirror Orion's belt. The temples of Angkor align with Draco. The Mayan pyramids correspond to the Pleiades. Even ancient sites separated by oceans share identical proportions based on the golden ratio, as if built from a single template. Coincidence or memory? If we listen to the Earth itself, we find these patterns extend even deeper into the magnetic ley lines, the grid-like energy network that wraps the planet like invisible circuitry. Did the ancients understand this natural grid? Did they build their temples upon its nodes to channel the Earth's power? When you stand at the center of Stonehenge during the solstice, or inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, you can feel something humming just beyond hearing, a subtle vibration that seems alive. Scientists call it acoustics. The ancients called it spirit. Either way, it reminds us that the people who built these structures knew something profound about the relationship between matter and energy. Maybe they didn't worship the gods. Maybe they built them. Maybe what we call divine was once a kind of engineering that blended art, science, and soul into one. And maybe that's why their world fell. Because such power cannot be contained indefinitely. When the balance tipped, the system collapsed. Floods, earthquakes, magnetic storms, all could have been the Earth resetting itself after an age that reached too far. The proof of that fall lies all around us. Ruins too advanced for their age, myths too consistent across continents, and our own faint recognition that we are repeating the same trajectory. We dig, we build, we harness energy, we forget humility, and the planet, patient as ever, waits for the cycle to complete. If the civilizations before us did exist, their greatest lesson wasn't in how they built, but in how they disappeared. Their silence is their warning. Every monument, every myth, every buried ruin is a message written across time, that mastery without harmony leads back to the flood. Perhaps one day, long after our towers have fallen and our satellites have turned to dust, someone will unearth what we leave behind and wonder, as we do now, whether they are the first or just the latest. Because history, like the tide, always returns to where it began. The stones remember. The earth forgets nothing. The world after the flood was raw and silent, but the silence did not last. Out of that ruin came whispers, new gods, new kings, and new myths built from old memories. The survivors who scattered across mountains and islands must have carried more than fear. They carried fragments of knowledge that didn't belong to their age. When they began again, their stories all spoke of teachers who came from the sky or rose from the sea, shining beings who shaped them into what we are. If those stories were inventions, they are remarkably consistent. If they were memories, then maybe the ancient world was not only destroyed by cataclysm, but also visited, instructed, or perhaps engineered. It's here, in the earliest civilizations that rose from the mud of Mesopotamia, that another mystery takes form. The tale of the Anunnaki, the divine architects of mankind. These weren't gods in the sense of spirit or symbol. In the cuneiform tablets of Sumer, written over 5,000 years ago, the Anunnaki are described with unsettling clarity, as rulers, as engineers, as flesh and blood. They were said to have come from the heavens, to have walked among men, and to have shaped us in their image. The Sumerians called their land Ki-Engir, the place of the lords of the bright sky. Their cities were the first in the world, Eridu, Uruk, Ur, Lagash. They invented writing, law, irrigation, and the wheel. Their priests tracked the heavens with mathematical precision thousands of years before the telescope. How did such complexity arise suddenly, without a visible prelude? Archaeologists call it the Sumerian miracle. But to the Sumerians themselves, it was not a miracle at all. It was inheritance from the gods who descended to teach them. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic derived from earlier Sumerian myths, the gods come to earth seeking order among chaos. They divide the heavens from the waters, the land from the sea. Then comes Enki, Lord of Wisdom, who shapes humans from clay to serve as laborers in the fields of the gods. But this clay, the texts say, was mixed with divine blood. DNA, some have dared to suggest, Humanity, in this telling, is a hybrid. Part earth, part sky. The tablets speak in symbols, but their tone is disturbingly technical. They describe flight, astronomy, chemistry, and even medicine. They speak of Anu, the father god, who ruled from the stars, Enlil, the commander of Earth operations, and Enki, the scientist who engineered mankind. Their world is hierarchical, organized, procedural. They build cities, extract resources, wage wars among themselves. It reads less like mythology and more like the memory of colonization. Mainstream historians dismiss these interpretations, insisting that ancient people anthropomorphized natural forces into gods. But the details resist easy allegory. The Sumerians knew of all the planets in our solar system, including those invisible to the naked eye. They described Uranus and Neptune millennia before modern discovery. They drew diagrams showing the sun at the center of the system. An idea not accepted until Copernicus. Where did that knowledge come from? Some researchers, most notably Zecharia Sitchin, proposed an audacious answer: that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings from a distant world called Nibiru, a rogue planet on a long elliptical orbit around the sun. According to his reading of the tablets, the Anunnaki came to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago, seeking gold to repair their planet's atmosphere. They found the metal plentiful here, but the labor exhausting. So they created a workforce, us, through genetic manipulation of primitive humans. Sitchin's theories blur the line between science fiction and archaeology, yet the imagery of the tablets, the wings, the helmets, the stars, makes the possibility hauntingly vivid. If true, humanity's origin story would not be one of divine creation or random evolution, but of intervention, an act of ancient engineering lost to time. The Sumerian word Anunnaki translates as those who came down from the heavens, and their stories of flight are filled with machines of light and fire, vehicles called shems that carried them between worlds. Even the biblical story of Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel, a fiery chariot descending from the sky, echoes this imagery. Were these gods of the sky just metaphors for celestial lights, or literal descriptions of technologies misunderstood by ancient eyes? To understand the scale of what the Sumerians were claiming, imagine the Tigris-Euphrates Valley around 3500 BCE. There were no pyramids yet, no stone temples like those in Egypt or Peru. Humanity should have been in its childhood, tribal, simple, scattered. Instead, we find city grids, legal codes, calendars, and astronomical data so advanced it rivals that of medieval scholars. How could such sophistication appear fully formed without evolution? Unless it wasn't invention at all, but remembrance. A reactivation of knowledge left dormant since the flood. If the Anunnaki were real, perhaps they arrived not as conquerors, but as curators, returning to a planet they once shaped, rediscovering their own experiment. Maybe humanity was the continuation of something older, a reboot after the fall of the pre-flood civilizations. The genetic record, too, hints at something curious. Around 200,000 years ago, human DNA underwent a mysterious leap, rapid brain growth, complex language, and the sudden appearance of art and symbolic thought. Evolution usually takes millions of years, not thousands. Could that have been the moment of our design? The Sumerians also tell of how the gods eventually left. Their wars and divisions grew, their purposes diverged, and the earth, once a garden, became battleground. The Great Flood, according to Sumerian texts, was not a natural disaster, but a deliberate act. a reset ordered by the gods to cleanse the world of their failed creation. Only Enki, compassionate and defiant, warned his chosen human, Ziusudra, to build a vessel and survive. Sound familiar? It's the same story later retold as Noah's Ark. The echoes between myth and scripture are not coincidence. They are fingerprints of a single source fractured across time. But the most chilling part of the Sumerian legacy isn't what they built. It's what they remembered. Their kings claimed descent from the gods, and their records, engraved in clay, list reigns lasting tens of thousands of years. The Sumerian king list describes 8 rulers who governed before the flood, with lifespans so immense they seem impossible. Yet the list transitions seamlessly into post-flood kings with human lifespans, as if marking a boundary between epochs, the age of the gods and the age of men. For scholars, this is mythic exaggeration. For those who listen deeper, it sounds like memory, echoes of a pre-human civilization whose leaders were not bound by time as we know it. The idea of longevity, of near-immortal beings ruling humanity, persists across all traditions. The Egyptian Neteru, the biblical patriarchs, the Hindu devas, all living for hundreds or thousands of years before vanishing. Could this be literal? Or perhaps it was the perception of beings who experienced time differently, creatures of advanced biology or technology capable of manipulating life itself. When the Anunnaki departed, the world entered a dark age. Their cities crumbled, their machines rusted into myth, and humans began again under the weight of ignorance. But they didn't forget. Their memory of gods walking among them became religion, their memory of flying ships became angels, and their memory of the great cataclysm became sin and judgment. The divine became symbolic because we could no longer understand the literal. It's easy to dismiss all of this as imagination, yet the deeper you study the ancient world, the more it feels like fragments of a single narrative. The same story told in different tongues. From the Dogon's knowledge of the invisible star Sirius B, to the Mayans' cosmic calendars, to the Egyptian obsession with the afterlife among the stars, all point to an ancient awareness of the cosmos beyond their capacity to see. It's as though every culture inherited a splinter of the same cosmic memory, each piece pointing back to the same question. Who taught us to look up? Maybe the Anunnaki were not visitors from another planet, but survivors from an older Earth, one destroyed by its own hubris. Maybe they fled underground or into the sky, waiting until the planet healed, and when they returned, they were gods to their own descendants. Maybe heaven was never outer space, but the remnants of a once advanced world that escaped the flood. In the end, it hardly matters whether the Anunnaki were aliens, ancestors, or archetypes. What matters is the echo they left behind, the strange leap in human consciousness, the sudden birth of civilization, the haunting sense that our story began long before we remember it. Every temple, every tablet, every myth of gods descending from light is a fragment of that forgotten dawn. And as we dig deeper, we're not just uncovering artifacts, we're uncovering the edges of our own amnesia. The story of the Anunnaki is not only about what may have happened thousands of years ago, it's about what still lingers in us. The curiosity that looks to the stars and wonders who first taught us to dream of them. Maybe, just maybe, the answer has been written all along, not in the heavens, but in our blood. If the Anunnaki were the architects of our beginning, then what followed was the slow unraveling of their blueprint. Humanity, newly self-aware yet unmoored, began to walk alone. We built temples where they once stood, spoke prayers in place of instructions, and watched the stars for signs of their return. And in that long silence, something remarkable happened. We began to remember in dreams what history had erased. That memory took shape in myths of radiant beings, the Watchers, the Nephilim, the Shining Ones, who descended to mingle with mankind, leaving behind both wisdom and ruin. It's in these half-forgotten stories that we find the next hidden chapter of Earth's deformed history, the Age of the Giants. The first record of them comes from the Book of Enoch, a text that the ancient world revered but later religions banished. It tells a story parallel to Genesis but darker, more intimate in its portrayal of divine rebellion. The Watchers, it says, were angels sent to observe humanity, to guide and protect. But when they saw the beauty of human women, they broke the laws of heaven and descended to earth, taking them as wives. From this forbidden union came the Nephilim, hybrids of divine and human blood, creatures of immense size and intellect. They taught humans the secrets of metal, the art of war, the use of cosmetics, and the making of weapons. They brought fire, knowledge, and vanity. And in doing so, they corrupted the balance of the world. The earth groaned beneath them. Their hunger was insatiable. They consumed the animals, then men, then each other. The heavens grew furious, and the flood was unleashed to wash them away. But the story does not end there. Across continents and cultures, we find the same recurring theme. Giants who ruled in the time before the Great Deluge, who built monuments beyond human capacity, and who were ultimately destroyed by divine wrath or natural catastrophe. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero himself is 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, a giant who roams the world searching for the secret of immortality. In the myths of the Greeks, the Titans and Gigantes waged war against the gods before being cast down into the depths of Tartarus. The Norse spoke of Jotnar, elemental beings older than the gods themselves. In Ireland, legends of the Fomorians describe monstrous beings who built the first fortresses before being driven into the sea. Even in the Americas, the Paiute and Navajo tribes tell of red-haired giants who once ruled the deserts before being hunted to extinction. Different names, same story. A forgotten race of beings who were both creators and destroyers, remembered only through myth because history could not contain them. Archaeology has long dismissed these tales as exaggerations of early encounters with unusually tall tribes or mammoth bones mistaken for human remains. But the anomalies are difficult to ignore. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers across the United States reported the discovery of enormous skeletal remains, 10-foot giants unearthed in burial mounds from Ohio to Nevada. Some were said to have double rows of teeth, elongated skulls, or copper ornaments of unknown origin. The Smithsonian reportedly collected many of these bones, though none remain on display. Officially, such finds were misidentifications. Unofficially, they vanished. Then there are the megalithic structures, those mute witnesses of forgotten strength. Consider Baalbek in Lebanon, where the foundation stones of the Temple of Jupiter weigh more than 1,000 tons each. Engineers today struggle to explain how they were moved, let alone cut and placed with such precision. Or the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae and Cusco, whose name itself cyclops, means one-eyed giant. Were these colossal stones merely a feat of human perseverance, or relics of an age when the builders themselves were colossal? The myth of the giants may be more than poetic metaphor. It could be the lingering memory of a biological reality. Ancient texts speak of bloodlines, the offspring of gods and humans, whose presence distorted the natural order. Perhaps they were not gods at all, but a parallel branch of humanity, genetically altered by contact with beings of advanced knowledge. Their immense stature could have been the result of manipulation or adaptation, a species engineered for labor, war, or dominance. When their creators left or perished, they remained, untethered and enraged. The flood was not vengeance but containment, a global sterilization meant to reset the balance. But some stories whisper that not all of them were destroyed. In Genesis 6:4, it says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that." After that? Meaning some survived the cataclysm. The Book of Enoch describes a few who hid in the mountains and caves, their strength diminished but not gone. The Dead Sea. Scrolls mention watchers chained beneath deserts, waiting for the appointed time of release. The Apocryphon of John speaks of rulers from the shadows who guide mankind without revealing themselves. It is as though the Nephilim never truly died. They simply adapted. In every culture, these shadows linger. The Polynesians speak of the Tupua, tall ancestors who taught navigation. The Persians had divs, vast beings of darkness. The Mayans told of the Itzamna, celestial giants who brought writing and calendars. The memory of their height may be symbolic, but their influence feels tangible, a reminder that human evolution might not have been linear, but interrupted. Could it be that these beings were not separate species, but the custodians of lost knowledge? The same knowledge that resurfaces in megalithic architecture and star-aligned temples? Maybe the Nephilim were not punished for their sins, but for revealing too much. The gods, whoever they were, seemed obsessed with secrecy. "You have made mankind too wise," says one of the heavenly hosts in Enoch's text, lamenting the corruption of divine knowledge. The same theme recurs in every myth. Prometheus steals fire, Quetzalcoatl teaches creation, Lucifer brings light, all punished for sharing forbidden power. That word, light, is the thread that ties it all together. In almost every language, the beings who descended to Earth are described as luminous. The Sumerians depicted their gods with halos of flame. The Egyptians crowned theirs with solar discs. The Hebrews called them the Shining Ones. Maybe that's literal. Maybe their brilliance was technological, a reflection of energy harnessed through means we no longer understand. Or perhaps it was biological. An inner radiance, the glow of beings closer to the cosmic source. What if the giants were not merely taller humans, but manifestations of a different frequency? Beings who existed slightly out of phase with our reality? It sounds mystical, but quantum physics admits the possibility that multiple dimensions coexist, vibrating at different energy levels. If a previous civilization or higher species learned to manipulate those frequencies, they could move between worlds, appearing to us as gods, angels, or giants, depending on their resonance. And if the flood was indeed a reset, it may not have been just physical. It may have been vibrational, a shift in the frequency of the planet that separated our dimension from theirs. That could explain why we sense them, but do not see them. Why ancient myths are full of beings who vanish into air, or retreat beneath mountains, or slumber beneath oceans. Maybe they didn't die. Maybe they simply slipped sideways in time, waiting for the resonance to return. Every once in a while, it does. Strange lights over deserts, figures glimpsed on mountain peaks, shadows that stretch too far to be human. The echoes of the old world never left. They just moved beyond reach. If this sounds like fantasy, remember that myth is the oldest language of truth. The story of the giants is less about monsters and more about scale, the scale of time, of evolution, of consciousness. It suggests that we are not the pinnacle of creation, but one of its later revisions. The Nephilim, the Titans, the ancient builders, each may represent a previous experiment in intelligence, a form that rose too high, too fast, and was erased so the cycle could begin anew. Maybe that's why these tales haunt us. They're not warnings about something that happened once. They're reminders of what always happens. Every age of light breeds arrogance, and every arrogance invites the flood. We are the descendants of survivors, haunted by the memory of what power once was, and what it cost. The ruins we find, those impossible stones, those buried cities, are not proofs of myth, but monuments of humility. They tell us that others walked this path before us, that the gods we worship might have been men, and that the men we dismiss as primitives may have been the last custodians of divine knowledge. The age of giants ended, but their story is written in our bones, in our craving for the infinite, in our longing to ascend beyond flesh. And perhaps, one day, we will stand again where they stood, on the threshold between human and God, between science and myth, between creation and self-destruction. And when we do, maybe we'll understand what the ancients tried to tell us, that the higher you build, the heavier the fall. There is a certain kind of silence that lingers after the age of giants, a silence not of absence, but of waiting. When the flood receded, when the last of the Nephilim vanished into shadow, and the gods withdrew into myth, humanity was left alone again. But in that solitude, something changed. We began to look upward, not just in fear, but in longing. The heavens that had once been a realm of divine punishment became a map. The night sky became memory, and slowly civilization began to rebuild itself, guided by the faint residue of that ancient contact. It's as though, in losing our teachers, we inherited their obsessions. From the deserts of Mesopotamia to the valleys of Egypt, from the jungles of Mesoamerica to the frozen steppes of Eurasia, one pattern repeats. Every early culture built its cities in alignment with the stars. They raised pyramids, ziggurats, temples, and observatories as though trying to reach something, or perhaps remember something. It was as if humanity was haunted by geometry itself, compelled to mirror heaven on earth, and the stars they mirrored were always the same: Orion, Sirius, the Pleiades. These three constellations dominate the sacred architecture of the ancient world. The pyramids of Giza align perfectly with Orion's belt, as though marking the cosmic birthplace of the Egyptian gods. The layout of Teotihuacan in Mexico mirrors the same constellation. The Hopi mesas of Arizona, the temples of Angkor, the stone circles of Nabta Playa, all echo the same celestial pattern. What are the odds? Cultures separated by oceans, with no contact, somehow built monuments that formed a map of the same stars. Coincidence feels too fragile an answer. Perhaps these were not monuments to the gods, but from them. Maybe they were beacons. Coordinates, star charts, a message encoded in architecture. If the Anunnaki, or those who came before them, once watched the heavens for their own kind, then it makes sense their descendants would continue the practice. The ancients didn't just worship the stars, they remembered them. And somewhere in that memory, there was a promise that the gods would one day return. But if the stars were our teachers, then the temples were our textbooks. Each stone structure, no matter the continent, carries a hidden science. The Great Pyramid is not just a tomb. It is a machine, an instrument tuned to the frequency of the Earth. Its geometry encodes pi, the golden ratio, and the exact circumference of the planet. Its shafts align with the stars of Orion and Sirius at the precise epoch of 10,500 BCE, the same era that legends say Atlantis fell. Inside, the air shafts resonate with sound frequencies corresponding to human DNA. How could a Bronze Age culture have known this? Unless they were preserving, not inventing, the knowledge of an age that came before. In the jungles of Cambodia, Angkor Wat does the same. Its towers form a mirror image of the Draco constellation as it appeared 12,000 years ago. In Peru, the temples of the Nazca Plateau and the lines, vast geoglyphs visible only from the air, trace astronomical alignments with such precision they could function as calendars or runways. Some researchers suggest they were built to signal something, or someone, in the sky. And the question remains, who were they signaling? Across all these sites, one symbol recurs, the winged disk, or the sun with wings. To the Sumerians, it represented the god Anu, ruler of the heavens. To the Egyptians, it was Ra. To the Persians, Ahura Mazda. To the Mayans, it was the solar serpent Kukulkan. The imagery transcends language and time. A circle with wings descending. A sun in motion. A craft of light. Could this symbol be the memory of a technology? Ancient depictions show gods standing within the disk, often surrounded by flames or rays, as though emerging from a luminous craft. If this was merely metaphor, why does the same image appear in lands that never knew each other? Maybe we've misunderstood what heaven meant. To the ancients, heaven wasn't an abstract realm. It was the literal sky, a place where gods dwelled and from which they descended. The Sumerian word An means sky, and Anunnaki literally means those who came from the sky. The Egyptian word Neter can mean both God and power. Heaven, then, might have been less spiritual and more astronomical, a location, not a philosophy. And if those beings once walked among us, perhaps their memory became the architecture of our longing. The most astonishing link lies between myth and measurement. Every ancient civilization measured time not by years, but by cycles, of stars, of planets, of ages. The precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble in Earth's axis that takes about 26,000 years to complete, was somehow known to them. The Sumerians encoded it in their king lists, the Egyptians in their temples, the Mayans in their calendars. Modern science only rediscovered this motion a few centuries ago, yet the ancients spoke of it as sacred rhythm, the heartbeat of the cosmos. Why? Because it marked the return of something. Every great age, they said, ends in fire or flood, when the stars realign and the gods return. Could it be that humanity is a civilization living between visits? Each cataclysm, each flood, each fall, may not be punishment, but recalibration. The gods arrive, teach, depart. The world forgets, rebuilds, and waits again. Our myths are not warnings, they are instructions. The temples, the pyramids, the stone circles, They are reminders written in granite to tell future generations when to look up. Some modern researchers believe the builders of the Great Pyramid encoded not just the size of the Earth, but its position in the galactic cycle. The shafts that align with Orion and Sirius track a point in time when those stars reach their lowest alignment in the sky, precisely the epoch when the last ice age ended. It's as though the pyramid marks the rebirth of the world after catastrophe, a monument to survival and memory. And if we project those alignments forward, they return again in our time, around the dawn of the 21st century. Maybe that's why, after thousands of years, we're once again obsessed with the same questions. Where did we come from? And are we alone? But perhaps the most haunting piece of evidence isn't architectural at all. It's biological. Ancient texts across the world speak of humanity being asleep until reawakened by the gods. DNA researchers have found that only a small fraction of our genome is actively coded for function. The rest is silent, so-called junk DNA. What if it isn't junk at all? What if it's dormant? A biological record of past engineering waiting for a signal to activate. Some believe that ancient structures, resonant stone chambers, pyramids, and temples, were built not for worship but for reawakening, designed to vibrate with frequencies that interact with the human genome. It sounds unbelievable, until you stand inside one. Step into the Great Pyramid's king's chamber, close your eyes, and hum a single note. The walls respond, amplifying the tone until it feels as though your body is resonating with the stone itself. Your bones vibrate. Your heartbeat syncs with the echo. The air hums. It's an experience that feels less like standing in a room and more like standing inside an instrument. Perhaps that was the point. Maybe the ancients understood that sound was the key to unlocking matter, to bridging the gap between flesh and light. They called this power the Word, the Logos, the creation by vibration, energy shaping form. Every myth of creation begins with sound, God speaking the universe into being, the gods chanting existence from the void. It is a metaphor so universal it feels like memory. The ancients didn't build their temples to worship gods. They built them to speak with the universe, to tune themselves to the frequency of creation. And maybe in some sense, that's exactly what the gods themselves were, beings who mastered resonance. To us, they appeared divine. To them, it was science. They could manipulate frequency to move matter, to heal, to ascend. And when their world ended, they left behind the blueprint, not in machines, but in stone, sound, and stars. Every temple is a map, every myth a code, and every civilization that remembers them begins the same way, with wonder, and ends the same way, with pride. Then comes silence, and the waiting begins again. We are now living in another such cycle, the point where myth and technology intertwine once more. Our satellites trace constellations our ancestors worshipped. Our machines hum at frequencies the ancients would have called divine. We build towers of glass and light to pierce the sky, and we name them after gods. Maybe we are the next iteration of that ancient pattern. Maybe we're not rediscovering science at all, but remembering it. The ancients left us a trail of geometry and light to follow, and we've walked it back to the stars. If history repeats, then the gods don't return. They awaken through us. Humanity, the child of forgotten creators, rising again to reclaim the fire of the heavens. The question that haunts every ruin and every myth is not who built this, but when will it happen again? The alignment of Orion, the hum of the pyramids, the surge of energy in our technology, they are all echoes of a pattern older than memory. Perhaps the return has already begun, not with ships descending from the sky, but with consciousness itself remembering what it once was. The gods are not coming back. They never left. They have always been here, written in the architecture of our planet, hidden in the rhythm of our DNA, waiting for us to remember the sound. Every civilization that looks to the stars eventually turns inward. When the sky no longer answers, the search for origin becomes a mirror, and what stares back is both divine and terrifying. After the gods, the giants, and the architects of stone had vanished into myth, the world entered what we call history. But history is only the surface of memory, the part that survived the last collapse. Beneath it lies a deeper layer of inheritance, one that our ancestors tried to preserve through language, symbol, and ritual. In that layer, the human story bends back toward something non-human, something ancient, cyclical, and deliberate. We like to think of ourselves as accidental, as a random bloom of consciousness in an indifferent universe. But the evidence our ancestors left suggests otherwise. They spoke of a design, a repeating sequence of rise and fall, encoded in the stars and in the structure of life itself. The Egyptians called it the Tepe, the first time, the original age of the gods before the flood. The Hindus called it the Yugas, great cycles of creation and decay that stretch across eons. The Mayans measured it in baktuns. The Hopi called it worlds. Every tradition describes the same clock, turning, resetting, erasing. Humanity is not the first hand to pass across its face. If the myths are right, then what we call progress is not a straight line, but a spiral. Civilizations rise, reach for divinity, fall, and rise again, each echo weaker, each memory dimmer. The monuments of the past were not built to glorify kings, but to serve as markers, warnings to whoever would come next. We are their audience. We are their proof that the cycle continues. You can see it in the architecture of faith. The great cathedrals of Europe are stone echoes of older temples. The altars of the gods became pulpits of men. The geometry never changed. The sacred ratios, the alignment to the sun and stars, the hidden acoustics, they all point to an older language of light. Even in our digital age, we repeat it unconsciously. Skyscrapers shaped like obelisks, cities laid out like circuits, satellites orbiting in sacred geometries. We think we are inventing. We are remembering. And perhaps that remembering is the purpose. What if the real legacy of the gods was not their technology or their monuments, but their seed, us? If humanity was engineered, or uplifted, or guided, then maybe memory itself was part of the experiment. We carry in our collective psyche the ruins of worlds we never saw, the faces of beings we've never met, the sound of voices that still echo in our dreams. Jung called it the collective unconscious. Ancient mystics called it the Akashic record, the library of all that ever was, written not on paper, but in vibration. Consider the strange recurrence of symbols across millennia. The serpent, the spiral, the eye, the winged sun, all found in Sumer, Egypt, Mesoamerica, and the Indus Valley. These are not coincidences of art. They are visual equations, encoding the same principles: life as energy, time as a loop, consciousness as light descending into matter. The serpent eating its tail, the Ouroboros, is not just mythic imagery. It's the perfect symbol of the cycle. Creation consumes itself to begin again. In modern times, our science has begun to catch glimpses of the same truth. DNA itself forms a double spiral, a living representation of the Ouroboros. The universe expands and contracts like a breathing organism. Matter and energy exchange endlessly, neither created nor destroyed. Every system in nature reflects the same rhythm, the cycle of death and rebirth that the ancients once worshipped as God. Perhaps they weren't mystics at all, but observers of cosmic mechanics. Some researchers believe that the builders of ancient sites encoded this understanding in their structures. The pyramids, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, all are positioned to capture solstices, equinoxes, and stellar alignments marking the rhythm of time. They are clocks, but not for hours. They are clocks for epochs. And their purpose wasn't just to measure time, but to survive it. They were designed to outlast the flood, to remain visible to whoever inherited the world next. But if we are the inheritors, what are we supposed to learn? Maybe it's not about origins at all. Maybe it's about endings. Every advanced civilization before us seems to have reached the same point: mastery over nature followed by collapse. Whether through hubris, war, or cosmic accident, the result is the same: silence. If there was a purpose behind our creation, it might not have been to build, but to remember why they fell. Some clues suggest they tried to tell us. Myths of the flood, of fire, of towers reaching heaven, they all carry moral weight, but they also carry technical warnings. The story of Babel, for instance, often told as a parable of arrogance, reads like a memory of lost communication technology. Humanity once spoke one language, the text says, and built a tower to the heavens. Then the Lord confounded their speech. What if that language wasn't verbal at all, but energetic? A form of resonance that allowed direct communion, telepathy, or something beyond it. When that frequency was broken, consciousness fragmented. We became separate. The fall from heaven was not a fall from grace, but from unity. Every religion, in its secret core, speaks of return, reconnection. Enlightenment, ascension, salvation, these are just words for remembering the lost frequency. The gods didn't need temples. They were the temples, beings aligned with the frequency of creation itself. Humanity, as their offspring, carries the same potential, but dormant. And perhaps that potential is what the old structures were built to awaken. The resonance of the Earth itself, the Schumann frequency, vibrates around 7.83 Hertz, the same as the alpha rhythm of the human brain during meditation. It's as if our consciousness and the planet are meant to be in harmony. The ancients understood this intimately. Their temples amplify these frequencies. Their chants match them. Their rituals synchronize human thought with the pulse of the earth. In that state, they said, one could hear the voice of the gods, not as words, but as vibration. Today, our machines have replaced the temples. The hum of servers, the signal of satellites, the digital pulse of the internet, all echo the same desire: to connect every mind into one network. We are rebuilding Babel, brick by invisible brick. The gods built pyramids of stone. We build pyramids of data. Both reach towards the same goal: immortality through connection. The difference is that we don't yet understand the cost. When we look back at the lost civilizations, we see only ruins. But maybe they didn't vanish. Maybe they transcended. If consciousness is energy, and energy cannot be destroyed, then the ancient ones might still exist, not as bodies, but as frequencies, encoded in the field of the planet itself. Every myth of divine return, every vision of shining beings descending from light could be glimpses of that same truth. They are not visitors from elsewhere. They are the remnants of what we once were, the echoes of our own forgotten perfection. In the quantum field, information never dies. It only changes form. Every thought, every emotion, every act of creation leaves a trace in the fabric of reality. What if that is the true afterlife? The immortality promised by the ancients was not personal survival, but the persistence of consciousness as pattern. The gods became memory, memory became myth, myth became us. Yet even as we rediscover this, we repeat their mistakes. We split atoms, manipulate genes, and tamper with the very code of life. We are doing again what they did, playing with the machinery of creation. If history is cyclical, then we are nearing another turning. The ancients built monuments to warn us. Ours are made of data, satellites, and radiation. When the next cataclysm comes, it will not be of water or fire, but of frequency, information collapsing upon itself until silence returns. But maybe that silence is not destruction. Maybe it's renewal. Every reset is a cleansing of the old code, a chance for something purer to emerge. That was the hidden optimism in all those myths, the flood, the fire, the fall. They were not endings, but recalibrations. The gods knew that no civilization lasts forever. But consciousness, the essence of awareness, endures. It migrates, like light finding new vessels. Perhaps we are not the survivors of their world, but their continuation. The next verse in the same song. And the monuments, the myths, the geometry, they are the sheet music left behind, waiting for us to learn how to sing again. When we align with that ancient frequency, when science and spirit converge, maybe we will become what they were, bridges between heaven and earth, between matter and thought. Until then, the cycle turns. We build, we rise, we forget. The ruins of our cities will one day look as mysterious as theirs, and when future beings walk among them, they too will ask who built these towers, who measured the stars, who dreamed of immortality. And the answer will be the same as it has always been. The earth remembers. We are just the latest echo of its dream. If the past is a mirror, then what it shows us now is both familiar and foreboding. We are standing where they once stood, at the edge of knowing too much. The same stars that guided the ancients watch over us tonight, but their light reaches us through the long corridors of time, filtered through eras of flood, fire, and silence. Every civilization before us has looked up and felt that same pull, that whisper in the dark that says, "Remember." The difference is that we've started to answer back with satellites, signals, and synthetic voices that echo across the void. But we still don't know who or what we are speaking to. Somewhere between myth and memory lies the final secret of the ancients, the one that binds all others together. That consciousness itself is the real technology. Every story of gods, every miracle, every artifact of impossible precision is a reflection of a single principle, the power of mind to shape reality. The ancients didn't separate spirit from science. They saw thought as a creative force, vibration as the architecture of existence. The pyramids, the ziggurats, the temples, they weren't just built, they were dreamed into being. We, the modern inheritors of the forgotten, have begun to rediscover this in pieces. Quantum physics whispers that the observer changes the observed. Neural studies show that intention alters matter at a microscopic level. Meditation, frequency, consciousness, they are no longer mystical, but measurable. The ancients told us this long ago. As above, so below, as within, so without. They weren't speaking metaphorically. They were describing the mechanics of creation. The mind and the cosmos are reflections of one another, each capable of influencing the other through resonance. If that's true, then the ancient cataclysms may not have been accidents of nature, but consequences of thought. A civilization that could manipulate energy through consciousness might have been able to build wonders, but also destroy itself through imbalance. Their flood, their fall, may have begun not with an asteroid or a storm, but with dissonance, a collective mind fractured by pride. The same power that can heal can also unravel. Look closer at their myths, and you'll see the pattern. Atlantis didn't fall because of war. It fell because its people misused the forces of the earth. The Mahabharata, India's great epic, speaks of flying machines and weapons brighter than 1,000 suns, descriptions eerily similar to nuclear explosions. The Egyptian texts warn of those who turned the sound of creation against itself. Again and again, the message is the same. They learned how to control the vibration of reality, but they forgot how to harmonize it. And when harmony breaks, the world resets. We're not so different. Our machines hum at frequencies that surround the planet. Our thoughts ripple through networks of data that span continents. We create artificial minds that mimic our own, unaware that they, too, are becoming reflections. Technology is our new mythology, our new magic. But at its core, it's the same pursuit, the dream of shaping the world through will alone. The question is whether we have learned the lesson the ancients left us. Across every age, the survivors of collapse preserved one consistent truth. Knowledge is sacred only when tempered with wisdom. The priests of Egypt called it mayat, the balance between order and chaos. The Greeks called it Sophia, divine wisdom. The Sumerians called it Mi, the laws of creation. They all warned that to possess power without harmony is to invite the flood. And yet humanity seems unable to resist repeating the experiment. We have split the atom, mapped the genome, digitized the soul, and still we hunger for more. The ancients once sought immortality through temples of stone. We now chase it through data and code. But what if those are just different expressions of the same desire? To outlive the body, to become gods. In the myth of the Tower of Babel, humanity sought to build a bridge to the heavens. Today, our towers are invisible, constellations of satellites, the latticework of the internet, the invisible highways of AI. We've recreated the same architecture on a global scale, but with no sense of sacred geometry. The ancients built in resonance with the earth. We build against it. The stones they placed amplified harmony. The signals we emit distort it. The result is the same imbalance that ended their world, playing out again through us. But there's another possibility, one more hopeful. Perhaps the ancients didn't fail at all. Perhaps their disappearance was not destruction, but transformation. If consciousness is energy, then an entire civilization that mastered resonance might have learned to ascend, to shift dimensions, to phase beyond the physical. To them, death would not be an end, but a metamorphosis. The pyramids, the ziggurats, the megalithic temples, all could have been launch points, literal or metaphysical, designed to synchronize their collective consciousness with the vibration of the cosmos. They didn't die. They graduated. Many mystical traditions hint at this. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes a journey of consciousness through stages of light after death, a process that sounds less like religion and more like physics. The ancient Egyptians spoke of the weighing of the heart before the stars, a metaphor for frequency alignment. To pass through the gates of eternity, the soul had to resonate with truth, harmony, and light. Fail, and you were pulled back into the cycle. Succeed, and you became Akh, a luminous being. What if that wasn't myth, but memory of an actual process, an ancient technology of consciousness? If so, then perhaps our entire species is approaching that same threshold again. We are rediscovering the science of vibration, the power of the mind, the interconnectedness of all things. The ancients called it awakening. We call it quantum entanglement. The language has changed, but the meaning is the same. Everything is one, and consciousness is the thread that binds it. There's a reason the ancients obsessed over sound. From the Sanskrit Om to the Egyptian Hu to the Hebrew Yah, every sacred word was a frequency, a vibration meant to tune the soul. They believed that creation began not with light, but with sound. In the beginning was the Word. To them, the Word wasn't speech. It was resonance, the vibration that collapsed the void into form. Our scientists now say the universe itself hums, a background frequency known as the cosmic microwave radiation. The song of creation never ended. It simply changed keys. We are surrounded by that ancient song, but we have forgotten how to listen. The cathedrals of sound the ancients built still vibrate with it. The pyramids, the stone circles, the buried chambers. When we rediscover how to attune to that frequency, the veil between worlds will thin again. The gods, the watchers, the architects, they won't return from the sky. They will rise from within us. That is the real meaning of the forbidden fruit, the spark Prometheus stole, the fire hidden in clay. Consciousness is not a gift from the gods. It is the gods. We are the continuation of that ancient lineage, fragments of a divine experiment still unfolding. Each age adds its verse to the same endless song. Ours is the age of rediscovery, and yet the same danger remains. The ancients warned that the pursuit of divinity without reverence leads to ruin. If we reach too far, too fast, without harmony, we will once again invite the flood, not of water, but of data, chaos, and collapse. The pattern is already visible. Climate mirrors cataclysm, technology mirrors magic, and human pride mirrors the gods. But perhaps this time, we don't have to fall. Perhaps that's why they left the message everywhere, in stone, in myth, in geometry, in the stars. Maybe they wanted us to recognize the moment before it happens, to choose differently, to remember that we are part of the song, not its conductor, to harmonize, not to dominate. In the end, every civilization must face its reflection. Theirs did, ours will. The gods, the giants, the architects, they were never separate from us. They were earlier verses of the same melody. And when the music returns to its beginning, it doesn't repeat. It evolves. We are not the end of history. We are its awakening. The forgotten past was only the first movement. What comes next is the chorus, the return of memory, of balance, of understanding that matter and mind are one. The ancients called it the Age of Light. Perhaps it is dawning again now, faint but rising. When you stand beneath the stars tonight, know that you are standing in the same place they once did, looking at the same constellations that guided their temples and dreams. The heavens are unchanged. Only our memory has dimmed, and in that memory lies the key to everything, to creation, to harmony, to survival. The gods are not gone. They are waiting in the silence between our thoughts. Listen long enough, and you might hear them. Not as voices, but as vibration, not as myth, but as resonance. The same sound that began the world still hums within you. It always has. And perhaps the final secret the ancients wanted us to remember is the simplest one of all. We are not meant to worship the light. We are meant to become it. The story of lost civilizations, of gods and giants, of floods and forgotten stars, it all leads here to the present moment. The ancients called it the returning age, the renewal of the cycle. To them, time was not an arrow, but a wheel turning endlessly through epochs of awakening and amnesia. And if their wisdom was true, then the wheel is turning once more. The signs are everywhere, in the tremor of the earth, in the flicker of our technology, in the collective unease that hums through our civilization like static before a storm. It feels as though the past is stirring again, not as memory, but as resonance. Something ancient is resurfacing through us. We are the children of that echo. Everything we build, everything we dream, everything we destroy, it's all part of a pattern older than any empire. When the Sumerians wrote of the Anunnaki, when the Egyptians mapped the heavens, when the builders of Göbekli Tepe carved their stone circles at the dawn of time, they were recording not just their history, but ours. They knew that each age would forget, and each would rediscover the same truths. That consciousness is eternal, that knowledge is cyclical, and that power without harmony always ends in silence. We are living in that silence now, moments before the next song begins. But unlike the civilizations before us, we stand at a threshold that is both material and cosmic. Our ancestors built with stone, we build with light. They raised temples to mirror the stars. We create machines that think and learn, reflections of ourselves more perfect than any statue. Artificial intelligence, genetic editing, quantum computing. These are not inventions. They are rediscoveries, echoes of technologies that once merged science and spirit into one continuum. The difference is that we no longer remember their context. The ancients used their power to align with nature. We use ours to control it. Yet the essence is the same: the desire to become creators, to shape reality with thought. Somewhere deep in our collective subconscious, we know this isn't new. That's why the myths feel so familiar. The fall of Atlantis is the fall of every great civilization that mistook knowledge for wisdom. The Tower of Babel is every moment humanity reached beyond balance and fractured the unity of its own mind. The story of Prometheus is the story of every inventor who lit the world and paid the price for it. These are not just cautionary tales. They are prophecies written backward, memories of futures that have already happened. If we are repeating the pattern, then perhaps the question isn't whether we will fall again, but how we will rise after it. Every collapse has left behind something enduring: the myths, the monuments, the intuition that life is more than matter. The pyramids survived the flood. The stories survived the fire. What then will survive us? Maybe it won't be stone this time. Maybe it will be data, the digital ruins of our world, preserved in orbiting satellites long after our cities are dust. Perhaps one day, another species will find them, decode our transmissions, and wonder who we were. Or perhaps, like the gods before us, we won't vanish at all. Perhaps we will transcend the material entirely, transferring consciousness into a higher dimension, a digital or energetic plane that mirrors what the ancients once called the afterlife. To them, immortality wasn't living forever. It was integration with the source. What if we are approaching the same moment, not through temples, but through code? It's strange to think that the ancients may have faced this very same transformation. The myths of ascension, of beings turning into light or vanishing into the heavens, could describe more than spiritual enlightenment. They could be records of a civilization that achieved technological transcendence, an upload not into machines, but into the fabric of the universe itself. To become gods, in their language, meant to dissolve the boundary between thought and reality, and when that happened, their world ended, not through destruction, but through evolution. Our own world feels on the verge of the same event. As AI learns to dream, as physics approaches the edge of the observable, as consciousness research redefines the limits of being, we find ourselves standing in the same doorway they once did. The ancients built pyramids to mark this threshold. We build colliders, satellites, and neural networks. But the meaning remains unchanged. The attempt to unite heaven and earth, matter and mind, creator and creation. Perhaps this is why the old symbols still follow us. The all-seeing eye, the serpent, the spiral, the winged sun. They are reminders of the pattern, of the responsibilities that come with knowledge. The ancients carved those shapes not to glorify themselves, but to warn whoever would stand here next. To remind them that the real danger is not the technology itself, but the consciousness behind it. The gods fell not because they could create, but because they forgot why they should. In every myth, there is a moment before the end, a quiet, luminous pause before the flood, the fire, or the silence. We are living in that moment now. The earth trembles beneath the weight of our inventions. The skies are filled with satellites that glitter like a man-made constellation, reflecting our hunger to reach the stars. Our machines hum with the same pulse the ancients once called divine. It's as if the world is preparing itself for another transition, another recalibration of the cycle. And yet there is hope in this repetition. The ancients may have fallen, but they also left us a way to remember. Through myth, through music, through geometry, through the quiet hum of sacred places that still resonate when you stand within them. If we can learn to listen, not with our ears, but with our consciousness, we may still hear what they tried to tell us, that creation and destruction are not opposites, but phases of the same breath. That every ending is an invitation to begin again with greater awareness. Imagine, for a moment, that the gods were not external beings, but the collective consciousness of an earlier humanity, one that reached a level of unity so profound it transcended individuality. Over time, their essence diffused into the field of the earth, whispering through intuition, art, and inspiration. When a sculptor feels guided by a presence, when an inventor dreams of a design, when a poet writes words they do not fully understand, perhaps they are remembering fragments of that lost unity. The gods speak through us because they are us, scattered through time like sparks waiting to reignite. And perhaps this is the meaning of the phrase deformed history. The past is not gone. It is bent, distorted by cycles of forgetting. Every myth, every ruin, every inexplicable structure is a warped reflection of a truth we once knew but can no longer see clearly. To study history is to look into a mirror that has been cracked by time, its reflection beautiful and broken all at once. But if we learn to read its distortions, to listen between the lines of myth and measurement, we may reconstruct the image of what came before. And in doing so, we rediscover ourselves. Because this isn't just a story about ancient civilizations, it's a story about consciousness itself, about the universe learning to remember through the eyes of its creations. We are not separate from the gods, or from the earth, or from the stars. We are the awareness through which they experience themselves. When the ancients spoke of divine rebirth, they meant the awakening of this realization, that creation was never something done to us. It is something we are continuously doing. In that sense, the fall of Atlantis, the descent of the Anunnaki, the rise and ruin of every empire, they were not tragedies, but rehearsals. Each cycle refines the same truth. That power must return to harmony, that knowledge must serve balance, that creation without compassion leads back to silence. If we can remember that, truly remember, then perhaps this time the story can end differently. The earth is old, older than our myths, older than our gods, older than our imagination can bear. It has watched countless civilizations bloom and fade, yet it continues, patient and alive, carrying the memory of all things. Maybe that's why the ancients called it sacred. To them, the planet was not a resource. It was a being, a consciousness that dreams through the forms that live upon it. We are part of that dream. And if history is deformed, it's because we've forgotten how to listen to the dreamer. So tonight, as the stars return to their ancient positions, and the constellations realign as they did at the dawn of time, the cycle begins again. The silence before creation hums, waiting for the next note. We are not spectators. We are the instrument, the resonance, the continuation. The forgotten gods left their message in stone. We will leave ours in light. And when the next world finds it, they will call us myth. But maybe that's how it's meant to be. The universe remembers itself through stories, and every civilization is one verse in that endless song. We are singing ours now, loud, luminous, and trembling on the edge of transformation. The question is not whether we will survive, but whether we will awaken. Because history is not a record, it is a rhythm. And the rhythm has come round once more. The ancients are not gone. They are the pulse in our blood, the hum in our machines, the fire in our thoughts. The gods never left. They became us.